Dr. Bibek Debroy, welcome to MyNation's show on pre-budget assessments. Yesterday, there were some heated exchanges between the government and opposition on whether this should be a full-fledged budget or a vote on account. Technically, what is the right thing to do?
Well, technically, a vote on account is only when elections have been called.
Right.
A vote on account is after elections have been called, because the government is purely a temporary government. Elections have been called, and therefore, because you do not want the government to stop functioning, and because you need parliamentary sanction to have expenditure, you therefore have this system of a vote on account, so that the outgoing government has parliamentary sanction to spend out of the consolidated fund of India.
Budget has ceased to be a time for, announcing big ticket reforms and all that. Besides, recently there was a report that the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister has advised the government to maintain strict fiscal discipline. Does this mean no big tax cuts at all?
Let's take this one step at a time. Budgets have often been equated with big bang policy announcements. This government does not believe that the government only functions on a single day in the year and goes to sleep for the other 364, 365 days of the year. Therefore, this equation of big bang policy announcements with the budget is unwarranted. We need to realize that the budget is just an annual statement of the union government's receipts and expenditure.
Right.
I'm flagging this because a large part of public expenditure, government expenditure, including capital formation, now happens at the level of the states. On the tax side, although GST is still work in progress, changes on the indirect tax side are essentially now driven by the GST Council. So therefore, except for items that are clearly going to be out of the purview of GST, one should not expect any changes on the GST side. On the direct tax side, there is a task force that has been set up to suggest changes on the tax side. And I'm talking about substantive changes in rates. I'm not talking about whether it is salaries, pensions, interest payments, etc., etc. The union government also has to spend on things that are its mandated requirement under the 7th schedule to the Constitution, namely railways, defense, national highways, etc., etc. Plus, one must remember not only the fiscal devolution that I've mentioned to the states, but also the GST compensation to the states. Therefore, the opportunity for the so-called populist tendency is constrained.
Right.
Fiscal consolidation is extremely important. This government has not deviated from the path of fiscal consolidation.
Now, one of the things you said in reply to the previous question was that substantial, powers for reforms now rest with the state. Given that scenario, and the fact that increasingly we are hearing a clamor for jobs. So anything in this budget which can be expected, which would unleash the so-called animal spirit of the market, unleash a job,
You see, as everyone knows, the status of data on jobs is very unsatisfactory, and one should not be hasty making comparisons with the West. In the West, employer-employee relationships are very common, and therefore enterprise surveys give you a reasonably good idea of what the status of jobs and employment is. In a country like India, where there's a substantial amount of informality, the unorganized sector, and self-employment, you will never get sensible data through enterprise surveys. You need household surveys. And indeed, the last robust household survey still goes back to 2011-12, which should not be like that, but that's the way it is. Jobs and employment. What do you expect the union government to do? The people are not going to get jobs with union government. So the best thing that the union government can do is to provide an environment for growth, an environment for entrepreneurship to flourish. And I'm stressing the word entrepreneurship so that people don't always look for jobs, but actually begin to provide jobs also.
Right.
To ensure the physical infrastructure, to ensure the social infrastructure, to ensure the transport connectivity, to ensure electricity connections. Now, all of this is what the government, union government, has been doing within the degrees of freedom permitted to it under the constitution.
Right.
Over and above this, I don't think there is anything particular that can be done on a single day of the year,
Right.
because there's a certain continuity to the process, and everything that the government has done since May 2014 is in terms of creating a better enabling environment collectively as well as individually.
Right. You said in the previous answer that the job data available in our country is not authoritative and not wholly reliable. To that end, for the past 2 days, there has been a controversy about government withholding NSSO data because it feared that it would, lead to conclusions that demonetization led to job losses. Is that assessment true, or it's just media speculation?
You see, the relevant people have not spoken. So it is unfair. It is okay for media to speculate, but it would be unfair for me to comment on this, because the relevant people at the National Statistical Commission, the chief statistician, they have not spoken on the details of this.
Right.
But let's understand the issues. I'm not talking about that particular report, but let's understand the issues. Unemployment figures in India are not what unemployment figures are like
In the
the West. The people who are really poor cannot afford to be unemployed. They are actually underemployed. So if I see unemployment rate of X%, unemployment rate of Y%, I should take that with a pinch of salt wherever that unemployment rate figure is coming from. I think the second thing to realize is there has been an increase in enrollment in education, including higher education. Not just for males, also for females. I'm not again talking about this particular report, I'm talking across a wide variety of reports. So if I'm looking at unemployment, I should no longer, I think, be looking at 15 plus. I should begin to look at 21 plus. Okay. Because if people are getting enrolled in institutions of higher education, be they boys, be they girls, be they men, be they women, it's a desirable outcome. So just because I find that they are not in the workforce, I should not be unduly concerned over that.
Okay.
Is people are now more educated, even amongst the poor. Because I'm more educated, I expect that the market will deliver me a salary higher than what I would have got otherwise.
Okay.
But because of the lack of skills, I do not get that salary from the market. So there is a mismatch between skills and education. There is a mismatch between my expectations and between what the market is willing to deliver.
Right.
Because the demand for jobs often happens in certain geographical places, and the supply of jobs is in other geographical places, and someone must efficiently intermediate between the two and match the supply and the demand. And in India, it doesn't happen all that well, which is the reason why you will find there are parts of India where people are saying there are no jobs, but there are parts of India where you will find people saying that I can't find people competent to work.
Right, right. Doesn't it also mean somewhere that the skill development project of India, government of India, hasn't quite taken off?
Yes, and also, you see, skills need to be delivered not just by the government, but also by the private sector. It's not just that the government's attempts have not led to the desired results. There have been instances where the ITIs were adopted by the private sector under the PPP mode. Those have not delivered either.
My final question is about an exercise that you have been involved in. It is, although we have discussed that the budget day is no longer a day for big announcements, the Prime Minister will make a concluding speech after the budget debate is over. So then there are certain things that Mr. Narendra Modi had promised 5 years ago, which the opposition obviously will hold him accountable for. And one of the promises was minimum government, maximum governance. It is often understood that minimum government means small ministries or small number of ministries, whereas government also exists in the form of laws. Now, you have been part of an exercise of telling the states what laws are redundant now. They are no longer required. What is the, when you look back for the past 3 or 4 years for which you were part of this exercise, how far have we succeeded? Of course, on the larger front, we see things like Section 377 now read down by the Supreme Court, which means no government in people's bedrooms. So, like no government in market, let's say. How far have we, proceeded in ensuring there is least government in the market?
Firstly, there is the question of statutes. Now, so far as the statutes are concerned, about 1,600 old statutes at the union government level have been repealed.
Okay.
There are another about 200 and many people don't know this.
Right.
There are another 230 odd statutes, old statutes, that should be repealed, but under the constitution that repealing can only be done by the states.
Okay.
Meaning they were inherited because they're old, but under the constitution and the 7th schedule they can only be repealed by the states. There is another aspect of law reform, which is to rationalize and harmonize the statutes that remain. That is still work in progress. On so far as the union government is concerned, I can give you several instances where the importance of the government has become less. Whether it is in terms of interviews for Group C and Group D posts, whether it is in terms of what the Ministry of Commerce and Industry has done, whether it's in terms of the DIPP-driven initiative, I'm not talking about the World Bank one,
yes,
of improving the business environment, all of whether it is the National Agricultural Market, the GEM portal, all of these are in the area of not so much statutes, but administrative reform, which makes life simpler for citizens. I can talk about passports, I can talk about refunds that are due to you under the personal income tax provisions, all of this.
Right.
On the broader issue, I think one should ask, minimum government for who? It's all very well for you and me to argue for minimum government sitting in Mumbai and Delhi. But there are 100,000 villages in India where government has never existed. I have not had the electricity, I have not had the roads, I have not had access to the dispute resolution system, I have not had access to gas connections. Now there, I want the government to be there.
Right.
So I don't think it's very fair to use labels and say minimum government.
Right.
Because minimum government where government's presence is excessive,
Yeah.
reducing
In the market, for example.
But simultaneously in places where the government has not existed,
Right.
I do need to have the government.
Right. For electricity, railways, etc., connectivity, transportation. Dr. Debroy, thank you for talking to MyNation. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.